We're in Birmingham with the Blue Team. Today, the Conservatives gather to lick their wounds after their worst electoral drubbing in decades. Some thought this would be a pretty miserable affair. Many of their big guns haven't even bothered to turn up. Rishi Sunak's here today, but he won't be hanging around to watch the contest to succeed him. But after a Labour conference week that turned into a bit of a nightmare for Keir Starmer, what with the paid-for suits and the borrowed flats and being told by delegates not to scrap the winter fuel allowance, there's a gleam of hope in Tory eyes. They've also been cheered up by the Canterbury MP Rosie Duffield, who this morning announced that she'd walked out of the Labour Party, accusing Starmer of being cruel, hypocritical and sleazy. To be fair, Conservative optimism isn't entirely delusional. Labour took less than 5 years after their worst defeat in more than 8 decades to turn things around and send the Tories packing. Is it possible that with the right leader, the Tories could be back in contention next time round? Well, this morning in a special edition of the programme, we're going to be talking to 4 MPs who all reckon that they've got what it takes. We'll see. I'll be joined by the Shadow Housing Secretary, often in the news for her spiky views on identity politics, Kemi Badenoch. The Shadow Home Secretary, who'd probably like you to know more about his time as Foreign Secretary rather than his efforts to stop the boats, James Cleverly. The Shadow Security Minister, perhaps better known for his military record than his record in government, Tom Tugendhat. And the former Immigration Minister, who seems to have reinvented himself as Mr. Tough Guy on migration, Robert Jenrick. Plus, with us throughout the show, the former Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, the broadcaster and Conservative commentator, Ian Dale, and the political editor of The Spectator, Katie Balls. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Let's start with our first leadership candidate, the Shadow Housing and Community Secretary, Kemi Badenoch. Ms Badenoch, if you were leader of the Conservative Party this morning and a potential Prime Minister, what would you be saying to our allies, particularly the Israelis?
I would be congratulating Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think what they did was extraordinary. Israel is showing that it has moral clarity in dealing with its enemies and the enemies of the West as well. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, and I think that being able to remove the leader of Hezbollah, as they did, will create more peace in the Middle East.
Does that mean that you are ready to give the Israelis a free pass? Pager bombs, airstrikes, all of the rest of it?
It's not about a free pass. But Israel does have a right to defend itself. It is a small country surrounded by a lot of people who don't like it. Many of them have fled from those countries. Many Jewish people have fled from neighboring countries. Israel is their safe haven. And if we look at what happened on October 7th, we can see that they cannot be complacent. They have to do what they need to do to defend themselves and, quite frankly, to survive.
So no red lines for Israel?
Of course, there will be red lines. We have international law for that. But as far as I saw when I was Trade Secretary, those lines were not crossed, and it was quite clear that the IDF and the Israeli government were doing everything they could to protect civilian lives. That doesn't mean that no civilian life would be lost. And of course, we understand that the Palestinian people in particular are suffering. This is very difficult for them. But we need to remember that the aggressor here is Hamas. That is what Israel is trying to destroy, as well as Hezbollah, of course.
All right. In the contest that for the Tory leadership, perhaps the first task is to work out what went wrong. Why did you lose? Looking back at the campaign, do you feel that actually you deserved to lose?
Well, I don't think that we deserved to win. People didn't understand what we stood for. I often tell people that we were talking right and governing left. An example of that is increasing lots of prison sentences, but we didn't get round to building prison places for all sorts of reasons. And from the public's perspective, it looked like we weren't delivering. We need to be able to show that we will do what we say and that we also say what we mean. That's what I want to bring to the contest. I have cut through because I speak with conviction and clarity. The public want that. The public want to know what conservatism is about.
Well, we'll come back to the issue of your cut-through and all that in a second, but you said that no one knew what you stood for. Let me put what I think might be the real problem here, which is that the public knew exactly what you stood for. Parties under Boris Johnson, market chaos under Liz Truss, and record immigration figures under Rishi Sunak. That's what the public read. They knew what you were about, and that's why they didn't vote for you.
I disagree. Of course, there will always be problems in any government. Keir Starmer has barely been in 100 days, and he's already mired in sleaze and accusations of corruption. He's lost a Labour MP. We will always have these things. Every Prime Minister, you go back to John Major, had them. But if you look at some of the examples that you gave, on immigration, we tried and kept...
And failed.
Exactly. That's what I mean by talking right and governing left, that we were not delivering. If we tell people that we're going to do something, we need to make sure that we do it.
But the problem is that the public saw all of these examples and they understood that actually you had all the big talk, but actually you didn't deliver. You didn't deliver on the economy, you didn't deliver on immigration, and actually you didn't deliver on integrity and good conduct in government. I
think the question to ask is, why didn't we deliver? It wasn't because we didn't want to. It is because we were not starting from first principles. This is what I'm bringing to this campaign. It's how I'm different from the other candidates. I'm not standing, throwing out lots of new policy and saying, this time we'll do this. What I believe we need to do now is to earn the trust of the British people again. And that means starting with principles. What do we believe in? Personal responsibility. We haven't talked about those things as much. Freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, free markets. We've stopped talking about principles. That's what people buy into when they're voting for a political party, not just what latest managerial policy you might be throwing out.
Well, this is very interesting, because actually you've already gotten onto ground which people associate with you. You were both the Secretary of State for Business and Trade and also the Minister for Equalities. Is it a matter of regret to you that hardly anybody remembers what your main job was, because what you say on these other issues, identity politics and so on, drowned all that out?
It certainly was the case that even a passing comment on equalities would get a front-page news. And, you know, you sign trade deals, you deliver, you know, a transformation for steelworks in Port Talbot. It's a tiny little thing in at the bottom of a newspaper. I can't help that. What I can say is that every aspect of my job, whether it was business secretary, whether it's trade secretary or equalities minister, I got stuff done. When things are broken, I fix them, and that's what I want to do with the party.
Well, actually, you bear some responsibility. I mean, and I'm complimenting you here, that your capacity to attract public attention is pretty much unrivaled. You said this morning in the Telegraph something which I think is going to attract some attention.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah. Well, indeed. You talked about... It's about immigration, and what you talk about is not the numbers, but the nature of immigration and immigrants. And you say, I am struck, for example, by the number of recent immigrants in the UK who hate Israel. That sentiment has no place here. Which immigrants are we talking about?
Well, people who come from countries where Israel is seen as an enemy. I remember growing up in Nigeria as a young child that people talked about Israel with a lot of positivity. What I didn't know is that in the northern part of the country, which was heavily Muslim, people spoke in a completely different way. And I will also remember 10 years ago when 300 girls were stolen from school and taken away by Islamist terrorists. It resonates with what happened on October 7th. And so I'm always shocked by the number of people who are unable to sympathise with those victims, people who are ripping down posters. I think that's extraordinary. Missing children's posters being ripped down because people hate the country. I don't think that has any place here.
It's interesting. You know, you make a virtue of your plain speaking and so on, but you evidently mean, when you say the number of recent immigrants who hate Israel, you evidently mean Muslim immigrants. Why didn't you just say that?
Because it's not all Muslim immigrants. And this is what I don't do. I'm very careful when I speak. I've met many Muslim people who love Israel. I met them in the Middle East. When I went to Saudi, when I went to the UAE, you know, you look at the Abraham Accords, there are many people in the Middle East who want to support Israel. I remember reading, after this assassination of the Hezbollah leader, loads of people from Arab countries who were actually very pleased. That man caused chaos in Syria. So it is not all Muslims, but there are some, those who buy into Islamist ideology, political Islam, they do not like Israel. And we need to be able to distinguish between the two. That's why I don't just use a word that brings so many people into the group.
You also say in this article, we need to demand those who come here love this country. How would you know? Are you thinking of reviving Norman Tebbett's cricket test?
No, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do it.
Well, how would you know?
Well, you have to demand it. You have to demand it. If you don't ask people for something, then they're unlikely to give it. We can't just assume that people will come into the country and just naturally love it. Other countries demand it. When you move to other countries, they demand that you believe in the place. They demand that you commit to it. We are the ones who act as if our country is just a dormitory and people can pass through. I don't believe that. This is my home, and I want to defend it.
But my same question, though, how would you know? And by the way, why would it matter to an employer whether his star engineer, who comes from Bangalore, loves Britain or not, as long as he does a good job?
It doesn't...
That's the best way of showing that he likes Britain, to do a good job for us, isn't it?
Yes, but it is not the employer's job to control immigration. It is government's job, and it should matter to government and to government ministers. Obviously, it's not something that you ask at the border and say, do you love the UK? It is something that you create as an expectation. This is how you drive culture. It's not through forms or through tests. It is through what the leaders say and do, and the legislation that we put in place to follow that up.
All right. One of the things that Conservative members and MPs will be looking at is the issue of character. Now, how can I put this?
This is going to be an awkward question, isn't it? This is going to be an awkward question.
No, not at all. You know, I'm very nice. David Tennant, Narendra Doris, former Post Office Chair Henry Staunton, just three of the many individuals whom you've exchanged angry words publicly. You evidently like a row, but what is it about you that provokes people?
I don't know. I guess it must be just being somebody who's very forthright. I mean, what's interesting about all those three people is there I was, being nice, minding my own business, and then they came after me. But what I will not do...
You weren't nice to David Tennant. You were not nice to Nadine Dorries.
Yeah, but he asked me to shut up. Why is it that people worry about someone who talks back? They don't like it when women talk back. They don't like it when politicians talk back. I will talk back. I will not stand there and let people punch me. If you swing at me, I will swing back. But I don't look for fights.
Can I just ask you very quickly this question? You grew up in a country, Nigeria, where politics is pretty direct, even pugnacious.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Are you just too Nigerian for British politics?
I doubt that. Nigerians tell me that I'm too British. I'm just Kemi, really. I'm something that's just different and unique, and that's why I stand out in this contest, and I think that's why the members like me.
Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much indeed. Badenoch, I should get this right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if you fancy a daily dose of all things political, check out our Politics at Jack and Sam's podcast. Our very own Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, and Politico's Jack Blanchard tell you everything you need to know for the day ahead. And they do it in under 20 minutes, and all before 7:30 in the morning. Scan the QR code on your screen now, and you can listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. In just a few moments, we'll be joined live by the Shadow Home Secretary and the former Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. And after that, we'll speak to Tom Tugendhat, currently the Shadow Security Minister. And finally, we'll be hearing from Robert Jenrick, formerly the Immigration Minister, and he will complete our set of candidates this morning. I'm beginning to feel like I'm on the political version of Strictly. Well, let's see what our panel... And you can all choose which one of you is going to be Craig Revel-Horwood.
Well, thank goodness it's not Love Island.
Let's see what the panel made of that. We're joined all morning by the former Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, the broadcaster and Conservative commentator, Ian Dale, and the political editor of The Spectator, Katie Balls. Before we get into talking about Kemi Badenoch, let me ask you about the system by which this is being done. That some people think that bringing the members into it and stretching out the process and all that's been a mistake, and it should just be done by MPs. Ian Dale, what do you think?
I think that's quite difficult when you've only got 121 MPs. I mean, I get the sentiment, but it's also very difficult to take away democracy from people. There would be an absolute outcry from Conservative Party members if that happened. Personally, I would return it to MPs, but I don't think it's possible to do.
I think you can potentially see an argument when the Tory party is in government and they have to change leader, because we've seen some turbulence of having a shorter circuit way of doing that. But I think when the party's in opposition, you know, you really do need a membership. You need people to go out on the doorstep. You need a base. And one of the problems the Tories have had is the centre is further and further away from the membership. But I don't think the answer of that is just cutting out the membership entirely. You've got to work out what the party is, you know, stands for, potentially get more members. But yeah, I don't think that would quite work.
And Andy?
I'd have the final decision with MPs, but I'd make sure the members were instrumental in getting the shortlist. So almost the other way round to what we've got, because the members need to be behind their leader. But actually, I'm a huge believer that ultimately you elect MPs to make the really tough decisions. That's why I don't believe in referenda either.
OK.
Yeah.
OK, let's start with you, Andy, on Kemi. What did you make of her interview as... I think I used the word pugnacious.
Well,
we saw that, didn't we?
But that's good, because you got some very straight answers. That first question you asked, the big question in the morning, she gave you a very direct answer. Maybe people watching on the telly who think, I don't agree with that, but there's a really important point there, because we were just chatting about one word so important in politics, authenticity. You get what you see with Kemi, and I do actually think that's one of her huge advantages.
Yes, I was quite disconcerted that she gave me a straight answer, Katie.
Very unusual.
Exactly. No, I think that is very Kemi Badenoch, and also near the end, she was saying, you know, are you difficult? Because the one thing we keep hearing from MPs is some find her too blunt. Some love the fact that she is straight talking, but it means her big challenge at this conference is not so much the membership, but trying to say to the MP colleagues that she might have wronged or unintentionally offended in the past, that her authenticity is a good thing and they put her through. And I think that's the balancing act that she's not completely there yet on.
The story that is often said about her is that she doesn't really do the schmoozing, and she doesn't really, you know, embrace her colleagues and so on. What do you think, Ian? Is it necessary, or is...
Well, I think if you look at who the people that are supporting her are, I think I'm right in saying that virtually every minister that's been part of her team is supporting her. Now, that, I think, does say something about how she gets on with people. But you're right, she has got a reputation for being quite abrasive, sometimes rude. But in a way, I mean, that can be an advantage in politics sometimes. I mean, Bill Clinton comes across as this, or came across as this sort of really nice guy, sort of everyone loved him. Too much sometimes. But actually, he had a bit of steel in him, and I see that in her.
Andy, let's deal with the substance. I mean, her big thing this morning is immigration. The way she dealt with it is quite interesting, because, as we'll hear later when we hear from Robert Jenrick, most politicians talk about numbers and they talk about illegals. She is talking about, if you like, culture. Is this a smart move, or is it one that could get her into tricky waters, for example, what she said about Muslims?
The answer's both. So I think it's a smart move because it plays very much to territory that she's confident on. We talked earlier on about, you know, almost her directness, her controversial nature and views on some things are her strength, that it moves her to that territory. But I'm not convinced it's actually contradictory to finding the right answer to this. I don't think there was much that you really heard when you pressed her around how this is really going to be applied. So smart, but not necessarily complete.
Do you think she set off another firecracker this morning?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will get people talking, and every time she makes an intervention, she does seem to, whether it's McDonald's or integration. But clearly, integration is one of the big strains when it comes to people's views on immigration, so it is a conversation that needs to be had in this contest.
It is a conversation that needs to be had, but not to the exclusion of everything else. And I think that's been, I think, one of the downsides of this, where all of the candidates seem to think that that is the one issue. It's overtaken Europe as the issue that's dividing the Conservative Party. And those of us that are very pro-immigration sometimes find this sort of quite difficult to stomach. Now, I don't see that she said anything particularly controversial. Of course, we want people who come to this country to love this country. Why do you think they come here, most of them, in the first place? Because they've chosen us, and we should actually be quite grateful for that. I don't know how you prove your love for the country. Okay. So I think, I mean, it's interesting.
All right. Well, To keep up to date with the leadership battle and all the goings-on here at the Conservative Party conference, better make sure you can tune into the Politics Hub. And that'll be live from here in Birmingham for the next few days. That's with Sophie Ridge, weeknights Monday to Thursday at 7 p.m. here on Sky News. And there's much more of our political reporting online and on mobile on the Sky News app. In just a few moments, we'll be joined live by the Shadow Home Secretary and former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. And after that, we'll speak to Tom Tugendhat, currently the Shadow Security Minister. Then we'll hear from Robert Jenrick, formerly Immigration Minister. Now, we have James Cleverly. Good morning, James.
Hi.
If you happen to be leader of the Conservative Party this morning, what would you be saying to our Israeli allies?
Well, I mean, I would say to them what I've said to them already when I was Foreign Secretary, when I met with President Herzog, when I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defence Minister Gallant. I've said that you do have a right to defend yourself, absolutely. They are surrounded by people who would do them harm. But when they do so, they have to abide by international law. They have to be conscious of civilian casualties. They have to act with professionalism and restraint. So I will be consistent. I'm always consistent. What I said to them before is what I would say to them in the future.
Indeed. You said to me, actually, a couple of times in the last year that you want restraint and that there would be red lines for you. Have the Israelis crossed any red lines this week, do you think?
Well, what we've got to remember is that they've had hundreds of rockets fired into civilian parts of Israel from southern Lebanon. And look, I am no longer, because we're in opposition, I am no longer able to access the detailed reporting that I did when I was Foreign Secretary, when I was Home Secretary. So it is.
But you don't need that to know whether the pager attacks and the airstrikes and so on might have crossed a red line.
No, Trevor, you do need to know. You do need to know. And it's easy to have a view. Everyone has a view. But when you're in a position of leadership, the kind of positions that I have held and I aspire to hold in the future, you have to make your comments based on fact, not just on TV reporting, not just on social media, not just on gut instinct. Any idiot can do that. When you're in a position of genuine leadership, you have to base your comments and your decisions on the actual fact. I no longer have access to that detailed reporting, and I'm not going to speculate or guess about what exactly is going on.
When you say any idiot can do that, some of well, let's not say call anybody an idiot, but some of your colleagues and rivals have been pretty clear. They think that it's OK.
Well,
and they haven't had access to any secret information.
Well, as I said, I am used to having briefings from the head of our intelligence services, from the head of GCHQ in Cheltenham. I've got into the habit of basing my decisions on that detailed level of reporting. Right. I no longer have access to that, so I am going to, as I say, be a bit more restrained.
All right, now let's look back at the campaign that you fought in June and July. Same question that I'm asking all your colleagues. Did the Conservatives actually deserve to lose, given the campaign?
Yeah, look, when the voters tell you something, you should listen. The British voters told us, not that they wanted a Labour government, in fact, in many instances, they told us they didn't want a Labour government. But what they did tell us is they wanted us out of office. And we have got to listen to that. We've got to respond to that. There's no point getting angry with the voters, and we certainly shouldn't imply or say that they were wrong. Voters are never wrong. Sometimes politics is brutal, but it's beautiful. We got kicked out of office for a reason, and what we now should do is get our act together quickly, listen to what they told us properly, and then campaign once again on our core values to get back into office.
One of the things that you said, and in fact you said this to me a couple of weeks ago, the public stopped listening to you. You served under 5 Conservative Prime Ministers, May, Johnson, Truss, 4, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak. Which one of them do you blame most?
Oh, look, there's no... Look, what I'm not going to do, it's
there's not a personality question.
Well, ultimately it is.
But it tells us something about what you think the public didn't like. If we know which of these caused the public most trouble.
I'll tell you what the public told me they didn't like. They didn't like the constant infighting. They didn't like the bickering. They didn't like the fact that as soon as someone became Prime Minister, there were people within the party who set about removing them as Prime Minister. We didn't do that just once or twice. We did it over and over again. The British people told us that they wanted us to think about them, not to think about ourselves, to help deliver on their aspirations rather than on our self-interest. So I don't have to second-guess what the voters want, because they told us over and over again, unambiguously. And we either listen and deal with it, or we're destined to spend more time in opposition.
Well, see, this is very interesting. You're telling me that what the voters didn't like was the squabbling and the infighting.
That's what they told me.
Well, did none of them say that actually they didn't like that, but what they disliked even more was that you spent 700 million of their hard-earned on a scheme sending people to Rwanda where nobody went. That they didn't like the Partygate thing in number 10, and they didn't like the fact that Liz Truss destroyed your competence. It wasn't just the squabbling, it was what you actually did they didn't like.
So the thing about the squabbling is it amplified the problems. And when you're in government, you don't get everything right, and there are always bad headlines. But the infighting, the squabbling, amplified the things that you've just mentioned and completely obscured things like furlough, like the fact that we'd kept unemployment low, like the fact that we were pretty much the first country in the world to give full-throated support to Ukraine in a practical way with anti-tank missile systems and main battle tanks. So the point is, our infighting amplified the reasons why people were angry with us. And that is why, if you want to get back into government, which I do, you have to address that first so that you can regain the trust of the voters. And they will listen to you when you set out policies. No one was listening, and it was our fault.
Let me ask you about something something about you, and this is about your track record. Not all of your colleagues were impressed by your time at Foreign Secretary. A previous leader of your party, Ian Duncan Smith, said that you turned out to be, and I'm quoting here, a wet rag kissing China's backside.
Well,
It's not nice, is it?
No, look, Ian has understandably a very strong feeling towards China. He's been sanctioned by the China state. And when I went to Beijing and confronted the Chinese foreign minister, I said that the sanctions on him and others of my other colleagues should be lifted. Now, the point is, if you want to exert influence as a diplomat, you actually have to go to those countries. And it's not a favour.
But what you're saying is you're a bit of a wimp.
Well, he's wrong. I mean, the point is, you have to confront the people around the world that you disagree with. In fact, it's most important that you do that directly, which is why I had direct contacts with the representatives of the Iranian state and representatives of the Russian state and representatives of the Belarusian state and representatives of the Chinese state. That is what foreign ministers do, and misunderstanding that role, I think, is what Ian's done there.
All right. Let me ask you about something in a way more personal, and it's a puzzle to me. You are by far and away the most senior of the four candidates. You've been Foreign Secretary, you've been Home Secretary. Polls say that you're actually the most popular with the public, even small margin, but still you're the most popular. Yet you got the joint fewest votes from your parliamentary colleagues. What is it that they know about you that the public doesn't?
Well, I think it's the other way around. What I have spent a lot of time doing over the last few years as one of the most regular communicators on behalf of the party is having to defend some difficult stuff. I haven't spent that time talking
Stuff you didn't agree with?
No, I haven't.
Like Rwanda, which you described, you may not have used the word BAT, S-H-I-T, but you were not keen on it.
So I have been the face and voice of, as you say, 4 different prime ministers, and I have been a team player, which has meant I have had to promote other people's ideas. I was happy to do so. It's what you do as part of a team. You know, some of my colleagues.
So you said things you didn't really believe?
No, you keep saying that. I've never said that, Trevor. You keep saying that, and I disagree with you. The point I'm saying is, I have not spent that time promoting my own ideas. This leadership campaign is about doing that. And the point is, you say I'm most popular with the general population. that really matters if you're trying to win an election.
Okay.
Polling also says I'm most likely to win voters back from other political parties. That really matters at the general election.
Just very, very briefly, it couldn't possibly be that they think that your propensity sometimes to tell off-colour jokes, Stockton-on-Tees, date rape and all that, could be a liability.
Well, the British people who have had a chance to see me with all my faults and flaws, I am still the most popular candidate for them. And the point is, if we want to get back into government, we need to appeal to the British people, not just to each other.
James Cleverly, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
It is 9 o'clock. You're watching a special Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips, live from the Conservative Party conference. We're interviewing all of the leadership hopefuls. We've already heard from Kemi Badenoch and James Cleverly. Next will be Tom Tugendhat and Robert Jenrick. But before we move on with this programme, let's turn to the big news of the weekend, that Israel has killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Iran has promised revenge. So let's get a sense of the situation on the ground in the Middle East now. I can speak to our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who's live in Beirut for us this morning. Good morning, Alex. What's the mood there?
Morning, Trevor. It's definitely a mood of, well, I've just spoken to the emergency disaster management head who called it a catastrophic humanitarian situation. We're outside an emergency cabinet meeting. There are now near daily emergency cabinet meetings by the Lebanese government. Out on the streets, there are people still sitting on street corners, sleeping on park benches, sleeping in their cars, because according to the emergency disaster head, the latest figures are now 1 million people who've been displaced from their homes. That's not just here in Beirut, and though there is a substantial number around the capital, but also throughout the country. So they're painting an extremely grim situation, with the cabinet ministers saying that they are struggling to keep on top of it. The agencies, the aid agencies, are struggling to keep on top of it. I was been at shelters where people, which have sprung up over the last couple of nights, where they're patently struggling to cope with the huge wave of people who need their help. And those are the ones that just got to the shelters, Trevor.
So do you think that there is any possibility that we're going to be, or anybody's going to be able to stop the careering towards a hotter conflict right now?
I think at the moment it looks very, very unlikely, although the Lebanese government and the cabinet ministers are clearly trying to keep a mood of optimism, talking about how they're trying all diplomatic means. But we are constantly hearing Israeli drones over the capital. The Israeli Air Force are still bombing targets all over Lebanon, particularly on the southern border. We are seeing, and the signalling from the Israeli forces is that they very definitely have not ruled out a ground invasion. There's a build-up of troops on the southern Lebanese border. We're hearing of more strikes this morning down in the southern city of Tyre. There's a huge humanitarian crisis unfolding here in the country, and the entire Hezbollah, or a huge group of the Hezbollah leadership, has been not only wiped out, the head of the Hezbollah militant group has been killed. Now, up until a few days ago, up until a few weeks ago, a US envoy was doing shuttling diplomacy to and fro, trying to mediate and promising that the red lines, and as Hezbollah saw those red lines which were painted out to them, was that the capital city wouldn't be badly hit and the leadership would not be taken out. Now, those who are being lined up to replace Hassan Nasrallah are far more strict, far more bellicose. Absolutely, the man who's lining up, who's probably going to take over, has been advocating hitting Tel Aviv from January. So the future and the likelihood of a peaceful outcome out of this is very, very slim. It looks as though it's going to get a whole lot worse.
Wow. Alex, thank you very much for that, and keep us posted and stay safe. Back to Conservative leadership race. I can now speak to the former Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat. Good morning.
Morning, Trevor. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. If you were Conservative Party leader this morning, what would you be saying to our Israeli allies?
Well, I'd be saying to Iran that this is no time for escalation. This is no time to be reinforcing your militias in the region and to be threatening democracies and countries around the region. Because the truth is, we've seen countries like Jordan, like Israel, suffering under Iranian threats for many, many years. And we've seen countries like Syria and Lebanon destroyed by Iran's activities in the region over not just a few years, but actually over 2, 3, 4 decades. And we need to stand with the people of Syria, the people of Lebanon, and all of those others in the region to make sure that Iran's pernicious influence through its vicious militias, like Lebanese Hezbollah, one of the largest child trafficking and drug dealing gangs in the world, and defending people against them.
Yeah, I mean, we can be as tough as we like in words on Iran, but, you know, since the end of the JCPOA, the process of softening towards Iran, they haven't listened to us. So why would they listen to what you have to say now?
Well, we don't just have to be tough in words, we have to be tough in action. That's why I introduced the new National Security Act. That's why I took action to make sure that we were keeping journalists in this country safe from Iranian threats that we've seen. And you've heard the head of MI5 talking about having 15 or so threats to life in this country because of what Iran is doing. We need to be absolutely clear. Iran is a pernicious and vicious threat, not just to the region, but also us in the United Kingdom. And standing with our allies in the region and countering those threats, whether they're manifested by Lebanese Hezbollah or whether they're manifested by the IRGC, is keeping the British people safe. And I will always lead this country to keep the British people safe.
I've been asking your rivals why they thought you lost in July. You've actually already talked about this. You've put it down to public disagreements amongst the party's senior figures and leaders. Do you really believe that this was mainly a problem of indiscipline in the ranks?
Well, I've gone further than that, Trevor, to be fair. I've also said that it was failure to deliver. You know, we promised that migration would come down, it went up. We promised taxes would come down, it went up. And so, quite understandably, people have looked at us and asked us what our record is. And we weren't able to communicate our successful record on universal credit or the amazing results we've had in education or the fantastic results that Andy Street has delivered here in Birmingham or that Ben Houtram has delivered in Teesside because of infighting, because, forgive me, but the focus of the media, quite understandably, has been on that where we've drawn attention, and we've drawn attention to the infighting, not to the success.
Yeah,
so the combination is that...
But the public are not dimwits. They can understand that their political figures might argue, but are you seriously saying that what they were really fooled by was the appearance of squabbling, but they didn't pay attention to Partygate? They didn't pay attention to the trust budget. They didn't pay attention to the record levels of legal and illegal migration, and that wasn't what they voted about?
So, Trevor, I mentioned migration in my roundup, so I agree, absolutely. And all of those issues come together and point to a party that had lost the trust of the British people. We need to restore trust. And the way we restore trust is by ending the culture of sleaze that sadly we've seen now infecting the Labour Party. And we need to make sure that we're bringing back the trust that British people can expect in their political parties. We need every party to be doing that, and we need it from the Conservative Party too. But it starts with making sure we get the right leadership, because as we all know, leaders matter, leaders count, and making sure we have the right leader changes the way our party will act.
Well, that's just really interesting. You're the first of your colleagues to admit that leaders matter. So let me try the same question with you. You served, or you're an MP under May, Johnson, Truss and Sunak. Who do you most blame for these failures?
Well, look, it's a combination. I'm not looking at any of those individuals particularly. I'm looking at the whole party.
Well, you just told me leadership matters. And I'm just saying, which of these leaders made a mess of it? Well, made most of a mess of it.
Trevor, the truth is that each of them bear their own share of the responsibility. Each of them got things wrong. Each of them also had their successes. You know, I will always be proud of the way that Boris Johnson stood up against Putin in Ukraine. I'll always be impressed by the way he delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. Both of those are huge achievements. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're building on successes like that, building on the reality of delivery, rather than on, as you rightly cited, those errors that leaders have made over the last 4 years. I'm not here to litigate the past. That's the job of people like Anthony Seldon and historians. My job is to look to the future and to offer the country the leadership that we need to take us out of the place where we are and make sure we're delivering for
All right. You are probably, of the four candidates, least well known to the public because you've had the shortest ministerial
Well,
career.
my career was to keep the king's secrets, and I did my job.
Indeed. What is it about you that the public and party members should know that would make them feel that you are ready for this role? That, you know, they've seen Cleverly in big jobs, they've seen Kemi Badenoch in big jobs, haven't seen you. What is it that you offer?
Well, you may not have seen the jobs, but that doesn't mean I haven't done them. Serving on operations overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, I've been a soldier. I've helped to rebuild governance in Afghanistan, in the National Security Council and in the government in Helmand. I've spent years serving the public in various different ways, including standing up against dictators, against tyrants, when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee. And as you know, that got me sanctioned by China, by Russia and by Iran, a country that is now threatening us again. And I've been warning clearly for years that the alliance of tyrants and dictatorships that we've seen growing over recent years is a direct threat.
But none of this explains how you would deal with the delivery problem that you've already talked about. Government didn't deliver. What tells us that you would do any better?
Well, the way I deliver is by leading. And frankly, what we've seen in recent years is an absence of leadership. Now, in the jobs that I've had, in the roles that I've performed over the last 25 years of public service to this country, in uniform and out, I have always offered leadership. I've always offered that direction, that example that we need to follow of how we achieve the results that this country needs. Because the truth is, this is a dangerous world. There are real threats out there, and there are real reforms we need to see. That's why I'm standing for leadership of this country, because this country matters.
OK, let me ask you this last question, which is really about character. And this is not, in a way, a personal question. It is a political question, but Cameron, Etonian. Johnson, Etonian. Sunak, Wycomist. Tugendhat, St Paul's. Does the Conservative Party really need another posh boy leader from a great public school?
Well, Trevor, I think the Conservative Party needs a leader who can lead, and you can judge me on the decisions my parents made 35 years ago, or you can judge me on the decisions I've made for the last 35 years. I think the decisions I've made for the last 35 years demonstrate the character that you're looking at. I have chosen consistently to serve our country. I put myself on the front line in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was injured in Iraq and I fought in Afghanistan, and these are decisions that I took. These are decisions I took to stand up and serve our country and to put myself at risk to do it. Now, I've done that consistently. I've done it for 25 years. And putting myself on the front line means that I have been sanctioned by China, I've been sanctioned by Russia, I've been sanctioned by Iran, and I've been threatened by all three. But I will never, ever go silent. This country matters too much. It matters too much to me. It matters too much to the whole world. We need to stand up for Britain, and I'm offering the leadership that will make a difference.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.
Well, following the killing of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in an Israeli airstrike on Beirut, we've got continuing coverage of the conflict in the Middle East across Sky News on mobile and TV. You'll be able to see the best of our reporting from the region. You heard some of it from Alex Forsyth a moment ago. You'll get live updates from our correspondents there, Ali Munkel and others, weeknights at 9 p.m. on The World, presented by our chief international presenter, Yalda Hakim. Well, back here in Birmingham, a little later in the show, we'll hear from the last of the four contenders, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. But first, let's go back to our panel for their thoughts on what we've heard so far. OK, since we spoke, you've heard from Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly. Now, let's start with Cleverly. You know, you would expect Cleverly to have been the sort of leading candidate here. He's most experienced, he's pretty good on telly and all of that. But he got along with Tugendhat the fewest votes. What's that all about, do you think, Andy?
Well, it's very close to the number of votes in Parliament, isn't it? So I don't necessarily think, despite the fact you have every right to ask that question, it's the real thing. I think the issue for James is this. He's got incredible experience, that came out in your questioning, and he's actually someone who understands this whole point about unity. But the question, and I wouldn't just say it for James, I would say it for everybody who you've talked to so far, is where is the substantial vision about new areas? You've spoken so much about foreign affairs, you've spoken a lot about character of leadership, and I said earlier on that's important. But this conference needs to hear about the big issues around the economy, around public service reform, and I think the question is, where is the real intellectual drive to bring those new things forward? And by the way, it's not just the conference that needs to hear it. What both Tom and James said, and they were both right, actually, is the public beyond these halls needs to hear that, because that's what they're judging us on.
I get that. In fact, towards the end of the programme, I want to talk to you all about what you think the Tories need to focus on.
Yes.
But are you saying that you're not hearing that substance from any of these candidates?
Well, just think about your conversation so far this morning. Now, maybe it's how you drove the questioning, but we've heard a lot...
No, I know it's my fault.
We've heard a lot, but also what's being written in the papers. We've heard a lot about foreign affairs, appropriately. You know, there's a crucial moment for the world, as Tom said. But really, we lost because the basic bread and butter issues of running the NHS well, driving up living standards, they were the things that failed us. And that's what we need to hear more about in this conference and beyond.
I mean, the foreign affairs parts of your interviews there, I thought, were quite revealing, where James Cleverly has the experience as Foreign Secretary, and I think you were right at the beginning. I think he will want to remember that period of his career possibly more than being Home Secretary. But he wouldn't answer your questions on that, saying, well, I don't see the papers anymore, so I can't really answer that. Whereas Tom Tugendhat, straight answers, and I thought that reflected on him well. However, Tom Tugendhat's problem is that all he's really known for is foreign affairs and security issues. And I think where he's got to concentrate on is to show that he's actually interested in domestic policy as well as foreign policy. So there were some good points and bad points for both of those candidates from those interviews. But I thought Tom Tugendhat, that was the most impressive performance I've seen from him in this campaign so far in all the interviews that he's done. But James Cleverly he's got to show that he wants it. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Does he want it enough?
They're saying that the front runners, Katie, are Badenoch and Jenrick. Do you think there's any chance that these two can catch up? Because there's an argument that says that actually Badenoch and Jenrick are appealing to one side of the party, yeah, what people loosely call the right, and these two are the centrists, and there should be one centrist and one right in the final thing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a path for one of Tom Tugendhat or James Cleverly to make the final two. And as you say, the main contest getting the attention is Badenoch versus Jenrick. But probably the quieter contest that's really worth paying attention at this conference is the one between those two. Because when MPs come back the week after this conference, they have one knockout round, and you would expect, on the current numbers, one of Tom Tugendhat or James Cleverly to go. If one of them goes because they underwhelm and the other gets an edge, they're the main opponents at this conference, they then have a frantic night ahead of the final knockout round, calling every supporter of the other and saying, come on, we're more like you than Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, come over to our side. And that's when potentially Kemi Badenoch gets squeezed out and doesn't make the final two. And then you do have a slightly different contest, because I think that, you know, everyone says, oh, the membership will always go right. The membership is very hard to poll. So I think if you had Robert Jenrick versus James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick would probably have the edge, but you don't know what exactly is going to happen. So I think there is a path for one of those two at this conference, but they need to really knock out the other one by showing that they have more of the platform. And James Cleverly did go back a bit in the final round that we had, because now Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly are on an equal number of MPs. And I think that's a problem for both of them right now, because no one knows, if you want to have a more centrist candidate, MPs aren't sure which one to go for, which one actually is in the lead.
And it is a complete myth to say that membership always go right. I was David Davis's Chief of Staff in 2005, so I well remember the membership did not go right at that point. What they did, they picked a winner. They wanted somebody who they thought was most likely to get into number 10, and that is the challenge for these four, because there is no law that says the Conservatives can't win the next election. It's a very shallow Labour majority. It seems huge, but they only got 34% of the vote. Now, their vote is unlikely to go up at the next election. So I think I mean, I actually have a vote in this election, and I want to see which candidate can take the fight to Labour and which candidate can articulate a modern version of conservatism.
And if I may add to that, and which candidate can appeal to the mass of UK voters who are in the centre ground. The Conservative Party membership, and I'd say exactly the same if we're in Liverpool talking about Labour Party membership, is not the same as the electorate who ultimately decides. So what I hope Conservative members will do is learn the lesson of history. You win from the centre ground, and indeed, that doesn't mean you can't be tough on some of the issues that have been discussed this morning, but your core appeal is right there in the middle. And I think it's clear that that's the winning way.
I mean, this is a very interesting point, because you could see that there is a difference in the centre of gravity of the Conservative Party membership from the public in general.
Yes.
And that might well turn out to be reflected in what matters. And it may be... Let me put it this way. Let me put something on the table as a possibility. That for the Conservative Party members, what matters is these issues of immigration and so on. But for the public at large, what they're bothered about is the economy. Now, the two things are interconnected, but nonetheless, what the candidates say and how they present themselves will reflect that. Isn't there a danger, as has happened in both the Labour and Conservative Party, that the party elects somebody that deals with the thing that the party really cares about, but that the public doesn't?
Well, that's always a danger in any election. But if you're a candidate in this election, you have to appeal to the electorate that are voting. Now, the first electorate is MPs, and the second electorate is party members. And that's been quite awkward for them, I think, to think, well, how do we pitch ourselves? But in the end, it is the party members that are going to have the say. And, I mean, I think they've all concentrated far too much on immigration, on the ECHR issue, for instance, where you look at even Tom Tugendhat there has tacked to the right on that over the course of it. Robert Jenrick certainly has. Kemi Badenoch, actually, has been much more nuanced in her view on the ECHR.
Also, you can always change tack, can't you? You can say one thing to the membership, get through, and then if you do become leader, say a different thing to the country. I mean, it's what Keir Starmer did, if you think about his leadership campaign. So I think that, you focus on the electorate in front, but I think politics has shown us that they're very capable of changing positions.
Politics. Funny old game. In just a moment, we'll hear from Robert Jenrick.
I'm Dan Whitehead, and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win. Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first. The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
And now for our final interview with a Conservative leadership hopeful. Earlier, I spoke to former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick, if you were the leader of the Conservative Party right now, what would you be saying to our allies in Israel about the situation in the Middle East?
Well, good morning, Trevor. Look, we all want to see peace in the Middle East and to bring this conflict to an end. But my view is this: Israel cannot be expected to live alongside terrorists, whether that's Hamas or Hezbollah. Hamas, that perpetrated the most appalling crimes on October the 7th, led to 1,200 people dying, and Hezbollah, which started firing rockets the very next day. So we should be working with all of our allies to try to bring this conflict to a conclusion. But the way to do that is to get the hostages released. That is the way in which we can bring this to a close.
Is there anything that Israel could do that would forfeit your support? Because you are probably Israel's, in this contest, Israel's most enthusiastic backer.
Well, I'm not an uncritical friend of Israel. I think it's right that we stand with Israel because they are the only democracy in the Middle East, an important ally of the United Kingdom. But we have to, of course, persuade them to take sensible steps, to do everything they can to limit the loss of life, particularly amongst civilians. And I believe that they are taking the steps that they need to. Of course, in a war, any army faces incredibly challenging situations.
When you say taking the steps, pager bombs, airstrikes, assassinations, is that... Or these are all reasonable steps in your view?
Well, I don't support everything that Israel is doing. And of course, in a war, there will be mistakes made by any military, as indeed ours do, in those situations. But I do think that they are doing as much as they reasonably can to try to limit the loss of civilian life. You have to remember that Israel is in a unique neighbourhood where it has on each side states that mean to do it harm, and it's important for us to support it in this difficult period. The way to end the conflict is obviously for the hostages to be released, including the remaining British nationals who are still held in captivity.
All right, let's talk about the central issue for this conference, which is to find a new leader. You're going to start with what went wrong. Looking back at the campaign that you fought in June and July, did the Conservatives deserve to lose?
I think we made some serious mistakes, and I've been, perhaps amongst all the leadership contenders, the clearest in setting that out. I'll always defend our achievements in government, but we have to be painfully honest about what went wrong. And I think we failed to deliver for the British people on some of the most important questions facing our country. We didn't deliver the strong economy, the strong NHS, and the strong border that we promised. So what we have to do now is to listen to the public. That's what any opposition has to do when they've just suffered their worst ever electoral defeat. And then we've got to say, how are we going to change? And I stand for change in this leadership contest. I want us to change our offer to the public. I want us to secure our borders by leaving the ECHR. I want us to end mass migration. I want us to build homes to get young people onto the ladder. I want to reform the NHS, and I want to get lower taxes and growth going again in the economy. These will be big changes, and I think the public want to see the party bringing forward serious answers to the serious challenges that are facing our country right now.
You're talking about changing and listening. You've said that you'd bring back the Rwanda policy that's been scrapped by Labour. That doesn't sound like change to me. It also doesn't sound like listening, because nobody thinks it's a good policy.
Well, that's your opinion, Trevor.
No, it's not my opinion. Every piece of polling, and it's one of the reasons you lost. That it was an unpopular policy that nobody thought...
With respect, Trevor.
Hang on, it was an unpopular policy that nobody thought could actually be delivered. You spent 700 million to deliver nobody to Rwanda. So, where's the change and where's the listening in that policy, which you want to bring back?
The reason the Rwanda policy didn't succeed was because it was not strong enough. I resigned from the Cabinet at the turn of the year because, unfortunately, I was not able to persuade the then Prime Minister and the Cabinet that we needed to strengthen the policy. The way to make Rwanda work and to secure our borders, to end mass migration, to end the small boats once and for all, is to carve out and to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. That's the argument that I made at the turn of the year. That's the argument I make now. Unless we leave the jurisdiction of the European Court, we will never get to grips with this problem. And the British public want us, they expect us to do that.
The intervention of the ECHR is significant, but not massive.
With respect, it was. That's not quite right,
In terms of the numbers.
Well, it's essential to the illegal migration question. Because the principal reason why the Supreme Court did not allow us to proceed with the Rwanda policy during my tenure was because we were part of the European Court. So we will never fix that problem whilst we remain within the European Court. I'm for leaving the European Court.
Let's deal with the central point you've just made, which is that you need to be much tougher on immigration. You really need to be quite radical. Nigel Farage's Reform Party wants a net-zero immigration policy. Does that appeal to you?
Well, I've been very clear on this issue. I've said that the age of mass migration must end. It's placing immense pressure on housing, on public services, and on community cohesion. You can't integrate 1.2 million people into a small country each year. What I want to do is to have Parliament set a legally binding cap on migration so that we can look the public in the eye and be confident that we're going to deliver on our promises this time. I want to set that in the tens of thousands or lower. I think that is the way forward.
So the cap could be zero, or it could... What do you want? More than zero? Zero what?
Well, I want to bring it down to the tens of thousands or lower. I think that's the right level. Of course, you have to calibrate that carefully on the basis of the economy, our housing supply, and other issues. But that's the level I want to set it. And the important point here, Trevor, is that you have to have a cap. Unless you have a cap, I cannot look the public in the eye and say with certainty that it is going to happen this time.
The first thing you said to me 5 minutes ago was about change. And now you're telling me you want to bring back a policy that was advanced by David Cameron.
No, Trevor.
Theresa May. Tens of thousands.
This is a very different policy.
That's exactly what Theresa May said.
No,
exactly what Cameron said.
Absolutely not. What I am saying...
What's different?
What I'm saying is there will be a cap. So Parliament will set a legally binding cap, cast in iron, so that this time it will happen. There's never been a cap before.
But how are you going to deliver it?
Before, we had an open-ended system where anyone could apply for a visa. We had no control over the number of visas that were issued as long as individuals met the criteria. The criteria set by the ministers at the time was wrong. It was too liberal. When I was the minister, I fought relentlessly for the biggest changes to our legal migration system in history that's going to bring down the number of people coming into our country by 300,000. I see that as a starting point, not an end. If we have the cap, which not everyone else agrees with, but if we have the cap, we will fix this problem once and for all.
One of the qualities that the conference will be looking at is the character of each of the candidates. Now, you've criticised Labour over donations, but we've noticed that you've received £75,000 over the past few months from a donor registered in the British Virgin Islands, a company called The Spot Fitness. Who are they?
As I understand it, this is a fitness company that operates in the UK. It's a perfectly legal and valid donation under British law, and we've set it out in the public domain in the way that one does with donations.
Sorry, when you say, as I understand it, somebody's wanged you 75 grand and you don't really know who they are?
Well, we do know who they are.
Who? Who are they?
It's a company that does sports fitness technology in the UK, and it's a perfectly valid and legal donation. We've registered it in the correct way, and I'm not aware that there's any challenge to that.
Who owns the company, and why are they giving you money?
Well, the owners of the company are set out on Companies House in the normal way, and the company obviously support, like many others
I don't think they are, by the way. They have no employees,
My
apparently.
vision for the future of the Conservative Party and the country.
Yeah. But the thing is, we looked at the record in Company House. They have no employees. We don't actually know the names of anybody. You could tell us. What about the new transparency? That's what's going to make you different from Labour. Why don't you just tell me who this company is?
Well, I think
they gave you £75,000 without talking to you.
Look, the details of the company are all online. It's all available.
Have you talked to the owners of the company yourself?
I've obviously met people who are involved in the company.
So who are they?
And well, it's all on Companies House, Trevor. I mean, you can see it.
Well, why don't you just tell me the name?
It's a perfectly valid and normal donation. But the point is here, what people are criticising Labour for is actually rather different to what you're suggesting.
All right.
What Labour are being criticised for is their rank hypocrisy. That they've spent years complaining about other political parties, and then they've chosen to take off donors and cronies and give passes to Number 10 in response. That's what the public are angry about the Labour Party.
I'm only stopping you because I want to ask you the question that most of our viewers would be most interested in, which is that a year ago, when you appeared on the show, you were more of a man than you are now. You've lost weight, you've got a new haircut. I walked past you the other day and almost didn't recognise you. What are you trying to tell us about yourself?
Look, I just wanted to get fit and healthy, to be honest, Trevor. I had put on a bit too much weight, and so I've gone to the gym, I've gone running, I've tried different methods, and, you know, lucky enough to shed some pounds.
Ozempic didn't work?
Well, I tried it, and it did work, but it didn't really suit me, so I've gone back to the traditional way. So maybe was I jogging past you when you saw me on the street?
No, you were walking very thoughtfully. Robert Jenrick, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
In just a moment, we'll hear what our panel makes of Robert Jenrick.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Back to our panel, Andy Street, Katie Balls and Ian Dale. Katie, Robert Jenrick, new action man.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting also your last question, pointing out that change in appearance, but also potentially change in his politics. You think back to, a couple of years ago, Robert Jenrick was not seen as a complete one nation cuddly conservative, but had a bit of a Cameroon in some quarters. And I think the journey he has been on is an interesting one, because you hear the way he speaks about immigration. He has the most hardline immigration policy of any of the candidates in this race, advocating for leaving the ECHR, tougher on legal migration. And I think there is a question of, is it the case that he has been on the same political journey as some Tory voters have, shift to the right? See some going to reform, or is he doing what is probably what is most opportunistic at this time to win over the membership? It's clearly working in the sense. I think he has taken the others by surprise by becoming the front runner, the bookies' favourite in this contest. But I think it'll be interesting to see. It might be easier to convince MPs than some of the Tory grassroots that you're a changed man.
Andy, he sort of held the door open, actually, to the net zero immigration policy, which I've always thought was quite a peculiar thing for Tory to take the view about, because business needs immigrants. So it's a kind of odd position for him to take.
It's also strange that it's so dominant. To the question that you've just put to Katie, I'm slightly sceptical when somebody makes the journey that Robert has. But there's a part of what Robert said in there. He talked about housing, he talked about health, the very big issues that we should be talking about. And actually, if I was advising him, that's cheeky of me, he will say he's doing quite nicely without me advising him. I'd say talk more about that. Because actually, if you look at his record when he was Housing Secretary, it was good. And I honestly believe that, rather than his views on ECHR, or what if you line people up on a Birmingham bus today, that's what they'd want to hear about. So if I could influence his campaign, that would be where to go.
This ECHR thing, a couple of them have mentioned it. Does it matter to the Conservative Party?
I think it matters to the sort of ERG wing of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. I am slightly surprised that they have sort of rode in behind Robert Jenrick, because, as Katie says, I mean, I've always regarded him as sort of the ultra-Cameroon type of politician. And a lot of people would be saying, well, is this journey that he's been on authentic? Or is he doing what Cameron did in 2005, where he appealed to the right by promising to withdraw from the EPP in the European Parliament? And David Davis, even though he was considered much more Brexit, well, not Brexity, but Eurosceptic at the time, just refused to do it because he thought it would be the wrong signal to give, the wrong thing to do. So there's always expediency, but it has to be said that Robert Jenrick has run the best campaign. I mean, it's been the most professional, it's been the most slick. And if you had said to me at the beginning of this, Robert Jenrick would be leading at this stage, I would not have believed you, but he is.
You take us back to 2005 when you ran David Davis.
No, I didn't. If I'd run it, he would have won.
OK. You were responsible
Chief of Staff.
for aspects of David Davis's campaign. There's a curious little passage in the interview about the £75,000 that he is getting from somewhere via the British Virgin Islands. Am I right to feel that this was odd, or is this just normal?
It is odd, and I was responsible for registering all David Davis's donations in the Register of Members' Interests and declaring them to the Conservative Party at the time. And it is an onerous thing to do because, I mean, a lot of the companies are household names, people that you know, and you don't need to do background checks. But a company that has 0 employees, does that pass the sniff test? Now, he's quite confident that it was permissible, and nobody suggested that it isn't. but it is a large donation. When you look at the spending limits, it is quite a big proportion of the whole campaign's funding.
OK.
So it's a difficult one for him to answer.
I should make clear, by the way, there's a British registered company. It got some money from somebody in the British Virgin Islands. It's a bit unclear, but anyway, it is legally, I think, all above board. But do you feel any discomfort with this?
There are very strict rules over this, and I'm sure Robert's team will have complied with them. I mean, obviously, I was standing for political office till recently. We had to deal with donations. The rules are very, very clear. But I think where your interview was interesting is there's the law and then there's the perception. And I don't know a lot about this company. I know nothing until I saw that. But you do have to be really conscious, and it goes to the wider point about how politicians are seen more generally at the moment, as does this pass what you might call the common sense test, as well as the legality, because I've got no question about the legality.
Is that candidates generally want nothing to do with the donation side.
Yeah. We're going to come back and actually talk about the way the politicians are seen in the last part of the show. So in just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with her eye.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
back with Andy Street, Katie Balls and Ian Dale. Andy, what do you think the candidates have to do this week at this conference? What is the most important task for them?
So the exciting thing, particularly for those coming to this conference, is it's a wide open race. You know, we've talked about the numbers in parliamentary votes are very small. We don't have any polling about members, so it's really there. So in simple language, everyone will this morning be thinking, can I do what David Cameron did in 2005 and demonstrate real vision, connection with the members? So I think it's about content above all else and showing your character as a leader. And then how do you portray that in a speech on the conference hall?
Oh, well, see, this is very interesting, because actually, if we go back to 2005, what people say about the whole Cameron victory over David Davis was not really about content, it was about...
Style.
Style.
It was about the word leadership. That's what we're talking about.
It was about David Cameron doing a look, no note speech, which Anne Widdecombe had been doing for years up to then, but the media fell for the fact that this seemed to be something new. And I remember that day thinking, because David Davis had made an adequate speech, I thought. He was never a great platform speaker. But the Cameron people managed to spin his speech to the media in a way that we didn't in the Davis campaign. And Cameron's speech was good, I'm not denying that. But I remember seeing Tom Bradby from ITV walk into his hotel room that night. My room was sort of on the same corridor. And I remember saying to him, I hope you're proud of yourself, just falling for this spin, because everybody did. But that was a crucial moment, and it was what propelled Cameron into a serious run. And they will all be looking for moments like that this week. Kemi Badenoch, in that interview with you, when she said, if they come swinging for me, I go swinging back. Now, she's got to have that kind of line in her speech, and the others will want something similar that we're all talking about for the next week. Now, whether they can do that, who knows?
I mean, I think all the leadership teams are studying that David Cameron speech and trying to get some clues and inspiration. And as you say, after the speech, you had this big effort by Team Cameron to share, I think, what journalists were saying with MPs, to say, look at this. But the problem you have here is obviously everyone goes home straight after these speeches because on a Wednesday. So how do you make buzz on a packed train? I think one of the things to look out for is, are we going to see any offhand tactics when it comes to activists? You know, is everyone going to fall asleep during a speech? Could you have people leave before the final speech? Kemi Badenoch, in theory, has the advantage because she's the last to go on Wednesday in that final four. They all took blank envelopes to pick the running order. It was that competitive. But you could, I think every camp is trying to work out, how do we point to activists, huge amount or lack of other candidates, to suggest we have the buzz? And I think that's going to be one of the quite funny things to look out for.
Yeah, it's probably worth remembering that these people are not competing to be something as trivial as television presenter. Well, they actually want to run the country, and
if they lose, they might.
Well, exactly, and as I said at the very beginning of the show, actually after Labour's week horribilis, actually it's just conceivable that they could be back in power in 4 years' time, and the person who gets selected on November the 2nd or whatever it is could be the Prime Minister. And they've got to be about something. What is it that Tories have to do, Andy, and on what issue? What is the issue that's going to make the difference for the Tories over the next 2 or 3 years that these people have to address?
Well, if you look at Bill Clinton, probably the best communicator in politics in my lifetime, it's the economy, stupid. I think the answer lies there, particularly as Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have said that growth is the single mission of their government, single most important mission of their government. And if you look at the reasons that we lost, our failure to delivering improvement in real living standards might not have been described like that, but that sense of we weren't getting better was there. So really, I keep coming back to who is going to demonstrate that they have got a plan that will drive economic living standards up in this country, embracing technology, thinking about the new industries, thinking about global competition, thinking about how it links to talent. That is the thing. And we've hardly talked about it in this election. But I honestly believe that that is what will win us the next election. And we've got the advantage of 4 years to prepare our position. So who's capable of that preparation?
Do you think that the Conservative Party is ready for that kind of debate. I mean, it's worth... I see your point, Andy, but bear in mind, Keir Starmer won 411 seats, barely talking about policy, barely having anything other than we're going to punish non-doms, and we've seen where that's got to.
I think it's clearly an important debate and conversation that needs to be had. Of course, the question is, I think it's still hard for the Tories to get back in at the next election, even, you know, wardrobes aside. But if, you know, given they are at least, you know, 4 years away from that possibility, is now the time for a detailed policy debate? Or is it more getting a sense of, you know, founding principles, what they believe in, which of course still touches on the economy, migration. I think there's also a question, which is we say this contest is too much about immigration already, but you do look at voters' concerns at the moment, and it does feel as though it is rising up as a voter issue, probably from where it was at the last election. So it might be, it is actually becoming one of the key things. And I think for the Tories, it's more, how do you win back the trust of voters? And maybe that is through providing policy, but it seems where they fell down the most, which is voters stopped trusting them to do what they said. And I think that's just a hard nut to crack, really.
And I think the key thing is that nobody's really interested in the Conservative Party at the moment, which gives the Conservative Party an opportunity to rebuild. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the Thatcher opposition period from 75 to 79, where she came in as a relatively untried leader, not very well known in the country, apart from cancelling school milk, which is what made me a Thatcherite, because I hated the stuff. But she instigated a really rigorous policy review and involved think tanks, and I think they're going to be quite crucial here, and going back to founding principles. But in the meantime, if you are a leader who can take the fight to Labour, people aren't going to be particularly interested in all the things that you've just talked about, Andy, for the first year or two. I think that comes a little bit later.
Well, thank you all very much. You'll notice I haven't asked you who you're supporting. I think it's too early for that, but we'll come back to you on that. That's it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday in our usual Westminster studio. Watch politics all week with Sophie and Ali.